So welcome. I'm Andy Ellis. I'm advisory CISO for Orca Security. Today we're going to do a modified version of Cloud Security Reinvented, which is a podcast that I host, presented by Orca. So Orca, since we're not doing the vendor pitch, I'll just start out with the vendor advertisement to make everybody feel a little bit better that you did actually get your Orca pitch. So you all keep me honest to make sure I get this right. Orca provides full stack cloud visibility.
Yeah, sounds right.
Across your entire AWS and any notional other cloud service provider environments using a one-time read-only integration, collects data from a disparate number of sources, creates a unified data model so that you can protect your cloud platforms all the time.
Yes.
Great. Okay, there's our vendor pitch. So, done with that. So it is a little weird to be live, and because normally I start and I say, good morning, and depending on when you are in the world, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. So for most of you, good afternoon, although this is recorded. So for those of you who are watching the recording, maybe good morning. So usually when we talk to folks, we're going to talk a little bit about their career journey and what that means in the context of cloud. So I'm going to introduce my two guests sort of with a little bit of their bio. I guess I can actually put my guests up on screen here. So let's talk about, how did you get to where you are today? So Lorna, I'm going to start with you. So Lorna Koppel, for those of you who have not run into you at some point, you're currently at Tufts.
Yes.
You run the security program there. And I remember when you were at Iron Mountain, which was your previous gig. So first question is, what's that transition like going from what was, I guess, honestly, a pretty boring vendor at the time, but a vendor, very focused on a bricks and mortar, to a really dynamic environment, probably with lots of people who don't want to talk to you or each other.
Exactly, man. It was definitely an adjustment. The good news is I'm kind of, have had an experience of changing industries, so I kind of knew that I had a whole new culture and environment to adapt to. I completely underestimated the complexity and diversity that a university has. It really is a minor, a city that's on a campus or multiple campuses. And the challenges with, going from Iron Mountain is I had to be a vendor and do vendor security reviews and also respond to many of these reviews. And I had a whole department that did that. To now I'm on the other side, being the client and trying to protect my infrastructure. But I also had that role at Iron Mountain as well. But it was a big change.
And Tufts isn't just a university, right? It's like an entire medical complex, and there's how many different lines of business do you have to interact with?
I should know that off the top of my head, but we have dental clinics. We treat dental patients, and as long as educating. We have veterinary hospitals and clinics. We provide many of the practicing, our Tufts School, our Tufts School of Medicine provides doctors to Tufts, what's now called Tufts Medicine, two totally different entities. And of course, then the traditional students, undergrad, and we have a lot of professional students and graduate students, and then research. We're a tier 1 research institution, which is a whole nother area that is very interesting to try to deal with.
Okay, and before Iron Mountain, you were at Kohler, which is almost even going deeper into the just build physical stuff space.
Yeah, you wouldn't think that, everybody's like, why does a toilet need security? And I'm like, well, there are some things that we care about. But yeah, it was definitely a manufacturing, and the cool thing about going between industries is, you get to focus on what's important to the business. And, the two things that were really important to the business was their intellectual property, which is before their color, and the color in their products and what they were releasing, so before the release. Because within days, stuff is re-engineered by the time Kohler products would hit the market. And then the second was, the efficiency and availability. And, one of the big challenges when I got there, it would take months for people to get their access set up. And then, but because we were being very cost effective at the time, at least the CEO thought it was, we would revoke access within 30 days. But most people don't do their work except for about every 40 days. And so months of access, you can just imagine how bad that was for the entire employee base. So, we were able to make some big changes to help them be more efficient. So for them, the security was in a different flavor than perhaps you would think.
The best argument that I was actually ever able to use against the 30-day auto termination of access was my pregnant staff. I said, how can you do this? Like, they'll come back and they won't have any of their access, and that's a violation because you're not giving them back their job.
I like that. I have to remember that for the future.
Yeah, it works. I mean, the real answer is like, no, in fact, you should revoke their access when they leave and instantly give it back, but different challenge. And then one other thing I noted on your resume, which is you were in the 8th Air Force as a weather officer. I was in the 9th Air Force, slightly, not quite exactly the same time, so I was on the other side of the planet. But I once heard about notional fog from a weather officer.
I was a mediocre meteorologist, but I have no idea what notional fog is.
So I was at an exercise in Egypt, Bright Star.
Okay.
And I'm in the briefing room, and it's basically, I'm one of only 2 lieutenants there. It's me and the weather officer, and everybody else is a colonel or a general. And he's doing the briefing, and it's Egypt. So it's basically, there was no big wind, so everything is sunny. And he points out there was a helicopter group, because it was a combined operation. And he says, yeah, their field is currently under notional fog. And same look you just gave, the whole room is like looking around. And all of a sudden, one of the generals goes, excuse me, Lieutenant, notional fog? And he looks over and he says, completely deadpan, he says, I suspect when the pilots have the notion that they would like to fly again, then they will stop reporting that there is fog.
The general can get away with saying that.
It was really impressive. Like, the general's looking at him and like just gave a chuckle and like looked over at somebody who ran off to, I think, make a phone call to that helicopter group to say, your fog has now lifted.
Oh, I have to remember that.
Yeah, so Yoav, you've had a slightly different career. Like almost every Israeli, you served in the IDF. And was it 8200? I just have to ask.
Yeah.
Okay. So, in case you haven't noticed, Israeli startups, 8200, every single one of them. But you went from there to a very small enterprise, Hyperwise. And so you've been doing security research basically your whole career. But what's that transition like, doing it in the military and then doing it for a small business?
It's okay. For being in the military and doing stuff for the military is very, very different than doing it as a civilian. Because in the military, you get to touch cool stuff like tanks, but in cybersecurity, we have similar stuff that are actually very cool. And in civilian life, you get to do other things which are cool, but in a different way. So you don't get to save your country, you get to save your paycheck, which is very, very different.
Which might be more meaningful some days.
Some days, but you get a different kind of satisfaction.
And then from there, you went to Checkpoint.
Yes.
Before coming back to Orca. So you've sort of gone little, big, little, big, little.
Yes.
And what's that transition like then, moving to a big vendor and then to a smaller one?
So I was, from the IDF, I transitioned to Hyperwise, and from Hyperwise, we were acquired by Checkpoint, so I joined Checkpoint.
Okay, so you didn't really have a choice in that transition.
No, I was completely surprised to be acquired, and then and joining such a big company. For me, it was very humbling seeing how a big business really works from the inside. And I went and I joined Checkpoint and we're in one of the innovation groups. I grew out there. I did many technology roles.
Was it as cool stuff as you've gotten to touch in the IDF?
And no, it's more it's civilian life. It's still civilian life. But yes, definitely doing stuff when you're working in a big company is very challenging. One of the challenges is that you have to deal with a lot of people that you don't know, and it actually it's one of the things that makes security even challenging. The amounts of different contact points that you have to do in order to fix issues or deliver change. So it's very different.
Okay, now I'm going to do some questions for them, but if you have questions, at the end we'll have time for some questions, so you can think about them now. If you have no questions, that's okay. But if you ask good questions, those Orkies there are up for grabs for the people who ask good questions. And if you don't ask good questions, they just go home with me. So I'm totally happy if you don't ask any questions. So first, let's talk about cloud security and the transformation there. So Lorna, this is one of those places interesting because education, I think, is often perceived in general as being one of the last adopters of new technology institutionally, but you probably have users who are at the cutting edge of adopting new technology. So from the security perspective, how does that affect your security program and how are you transforming it to deal with this sort of weird hybrid environment?
So thank you. It is a tough challenge. we have a, just like any institution, we've got shadow IT. And certainly people are going out and doing a lot of things on their own, especially our research community who really thinks that they can spin up and do everything that they need, which is their right. And so that's always a challenge. And we have our students who are definitely very forward-thinking and easy adopters. So, and then we have, IT that is burdened with such legacy type technology that it is really hard for IT to be able to move in an agile manner to support the needs of the community. So, so that's IT in general. And from a security perspective, it has been, even harder. Fortunately, I can occasionally hire some people that have been doing some fun new things at other institutions, and they can help with the journey. But one of the things that we've had to really focus on is not the technology. It's really about getting people to understand, especially leadership, the difference between how you would secure things on the premise versus how you secure it with a SaaS solution versus how you secure it with the cloud. Because there's a lot of misunderstanding, even from very well-meaning people, that, oh, we're moving to the cloud, everything's gonna be easy, and I don't have to do any security anymore. They're taking care of all that for us, right? And, and then your poor security people who have never had any experience with the cloud are sitting there like, I don't know, sounds good to me. So it's definitely making me think and helping our organization. Unfortunately, it's not just a security team, it's all of IT that is having to look at. We need to understand cloud better. We need to understand what that does to our environment. In particular, we really care about what does that do to our people because of our ability to be able to support the environment.
So one of the things I've observed and talked to a lot of CISOs is there was this benefit we got before cloud that we didn't really think about, which was it took so long to do anything that IT wasn't really set up to support you quickly. That as security teams, we had a lot of time to discover the things that were going on before they actually got into production. And with cloud, that time is just gone now. Is that a thing that you see?
Yes, it is definitely the speed of transformation, speed of people to be able to go do things without us knowing about it. We actually literally did just do an audit to try to understand the prevalence of cloud and other shadow IT that's going on. And of course, the results were a lot higher than what anybody expected. And so thinking how to deal with that, and you want to put some draconian measures in place, but that doesn't really help the business. So we're continually thinking about how do we create an environment that supports people that they want to come and use the services that we have, and we try to make it easy for them. So we have definitely having to speed up, which means shedding a lot of old ways of thinking.
Yeah, that's always the hard part, is that old way of thinking. So you talked about getting your hands on technology, the cool stuff when you're in the military. And now that you do research in the cloud, like you don't even get your hands on it, whether we would consider it cool or not. Like it is somebody else's computers. You don't just get your hands on it.
No.
How does that change how you approach the research problem around security?
So you can think about security if you're trying to research, I don't know, a software that you have on your machine. So whether if you have the source code for it or if you can just reverse engineer it, you can pretty easily reason about it. But having like a lot of contact with cloud services, they're essentially services. They're behind APIs. They're pretty much black boxes for us. And when we try to research them, we actually have to piece pieces of information together and string them together in order to understand what's really going on, and trying to poke and see what things that we can actually find there. So it's more like, it's not like opening a flashlight and reading. It's more like shaking stuff and hoping something would fall. So, yeah.
It's like solving a puzzle in the dark?
Yes, or in the research community, we call it a white box research or a black box research.
Right.
So the cloud is definitely more of a black box.
So it sounds like an interesting challenge. So one of the things I've been hearing people talk about a lot lately are ROI calculators, right? This idea that you can take this spreadsheet and figure out whether a security project is worthwhile. So Lorna, I really want your take on this one. I have my own opinion, but like I've been on both sides of this, and like I've had customers say, "I want your ROI calculator," and I've been on the other side where I'm like, "I don't want your ROI calculator." Like, are these at all useful for you in any way, like even just like convincing the procurement team that you did diligence?
So over the years, we've always had procurement people that have meant well, and they're trying to do their jobs, but an ROI calculator absolutely just doesn't work. And we very quickly get to the point of, if you're buying the cheapest thing with the lowest, what appears to be ROI, you haven't put all the right things into the calculator. You're not measuring the right things. And so, what I've seen in my career is switching between the concept of, really it's more, in most cases, back of the envelope ROI.
Yep.
And that, in the format that takes depends on the audience you're talking to. The CEO, the CIO, the CFO, they really want to say, do I understand the costs that are going into this, and can you at least give me some areas that you'd be saving on? Where I really find it also the back of the envelope is really helpful is because you've got the hungry security teams like mine. It's like, cool, I get to implement this and I can do all these things, and they don't understand the amount of resources from many other groups that have to go in and implement this and what it does to their workload.
Right.
So the return on investment is something that we really got to dig into from a back of the envelope perspective. What makes sense? What are you realistically going to be able to do in the climate that you're in? And then having those conversations, and you can start bringing the security team in particular, usually is the one that wants to adopt a lot, to kind of step back and say, I think I'm overstepping.
Yep.
And okay, I can accept risk for a little longer and not do the full thing. Where the ROI calculator does come into play is also helping people understand, especially as we've been doing the transition to cloud, is thinking about how you design stuff makes a huge difference on how the costs are gonna hit your budget. So the ongoing expenses. So trying to get the IT people to think differently about the choices they make, where the data goes, how long we're storing it. Suddenly we can start to question, do we really need to store the data for a year or 7 years? And if we do, we gotta think of a more cost-effective way to do it. So it pushes a lot of the questions up front.
Okay.
But I think the ROI calculator is really only for very certain niche situations.
Okay, that's good to know, I think, because a lot of people sort of over-focus on it. I want to talk about cloud security. ROI?
What's your take on it?
Oh, I actually think they're mostly worthless, made-up data, because most of what we're doing on the security side of the house is we're not dealing with actuarial risk, right? If you think about the problems that can happen to you, right? Some of them are, like, we have actuarial tables. We know the likelihood of being pickpocketed. And so you can basically just do the math and say, oh, I'm in Boston, like here's the chances this thing will happen. I buy insurance for those. But many of the risks are non-actuarial. Like the likelihood that you are going to be like murdered by your wife for, sending her home alone with the kids, like that's a little bit harder to measure because it's more personalized and it's about like, how badly you interact with your family. And so it's really hard in the security space where you're talking about sometimes existential risk. Like, what is the likelihood that we're going to be on the front page of the New York Times, or that Lauren is getting the phone call from Brian Krebs? Like, that's really hard to quantify. And so trying to like have an ROI calculator that says, well, you'll have a 5% reduction in risk of this type. Like, first of all, the number for that risk is made up, and the percentage of reduction is made up. And so it becomes really challenging. And mostly humans don't make decisions based on numbers and hard data. Like, it's very rare. They're making decisions based on their gut feelings. And if you use numbers that are made up to try to convince them, they will tear apart your numbers because that's easy to do, rather than face the actual argument, which might be much harder to do. Okay, let's talk about cloud security vulnerabilities, because I think we touched on a little bit the research that you're doing to go find vulnerabilities, but I want to talk about disclosure. So brief history of disclosure. I think in the early days, if you found a vulnerability, you either just dropped it one day and said, oh, look, I found a vulnerability in this system, and everybody hated you except your friends who bought you beers. Or you went to the vendor and they threatened you with legal action if you ever disclosed this vulnerability, and they never actually fixed it. And in fact, there was recently, I think was it a baby monitor that had this, where they finally released the vulnerability after the old version was deprecated. So they released a new version and said, oh, by the way, there's this vulnerability in the old version, but buy the new hardware. And then at some point we got into this phrase responsible disclosure, which I think we can thank Google Project Zero for. Oops, I shouldn't have said that. Some other notional entity has basically said, our rule is we will tell you and you have 90 days. And in 90 days, we will disclose with or without you. And if there's a really good reason why it would take 30 more days, we have an extension program. But I think cloud security vulnerabilities are a little different, right? Because we have vulnerabilities that are not like, oh, this is log4j that everybody's gonna have to patch. Like we have tenancy vulnerabilities where if AWS had a vulnerability in that nature, like 90 days is kind of scary. So like you're in the middle of this process because you have a team that goes and finds problems.
Yes.
What's it like for you and how do you balance those equities?
So once we have a vulnerability at hand, so the first thing we do is we try not to disturb any customers that are already on the platform. So it's really important not to cause any damage. In addition, you try to go ahead and report it to the security vendor. For example, AWS has a great security team, which are really responsive. Like you send them an email and they'll respond within minutes. And our at least to this point, our experience with AWS and reporting was that they were very responsive. Like issues were fixed within hours.
That's great to hear. Like yes. That makes me feel a lot more confident.
Yes, and if you think about the scale of AWS and the scale that their services run on, you need to have like a world-class deployment team and security team to be able to go ahead and do those things so quickly. So it's really humbling to see it in action.
Yep. But there's still technically a 90-day window that they could stall and they could wait. Like, is this the thing we should think about changing to make a different standard for tenancy vulnerabilities in cloud players?
I think that the 90-day rule was created in the era where you had to deliver software into the hands of people. Yep. So think about it, Google Chrome, after you deploy a version, you need everyone, like the billion+ users around the world to actually update it. And so you get on a Zoom call and someone shares the screen and you see like the red marker on Chrome, right. And you want to tell them let's stop the Zoom meeting and let's help you.
Update your browser.
Yeah, update your browser, please. But AWS is deployed for everyone immediately. Like yep. And cloud providers in general, it's the same thing. So holding them to the standard of the ones that need to distribute firmware for your printer sounds like not the same thing. And since since the cloud has transformed and enabled us to run a lot faster, we should as a community start thinking about how we're reducing those numbers from 90 days into single-digit days. But it's still we're still learning as a community.
Yep. So you have a research team who, there's marketing benefit. Marketing teams love when you find a vulnerability and they get to, the cool name and press release. Mm-hmm. But like, what's it like being on your research team, and why do you have people who go to find vulnerabilities in platforms like AWS?
So the mission of our research team is to make the cloud better for everyone, regardless if you're a customer or just a user. And they're actually very smart, super capable, world-class researchers who just go day in, day out, think about how to poke at the cloud and see if we can make it a lot more resilient, a lot stronger. So that's their mission, and I believe they're pretty fulfilled from their role. I'm not one of the researchers on the team. I only represent them, but I'm really proud of representing them because they do such a tremendous job.
That's awesome. So Lorna, I think you've mostly spent your career receiving vulnerabilities, not creating them for other people.
Having to deal with them.
So thank you for not creating more vulnerabilities for everybody else to deal with. Yes. But what would you like to see improved in the way that vulnerabilities are handled and disclosed as somebody who represents sort of the end user community?
From the end user side, one of the things that my nirvana would be is, how do vendors get the vulnerabilities and what you should do about it to the right people on a consistent basis? Yep. you know, and so one of the challenges is that I'm expecting all of my different technologists to be keeping an eye on whatever technology they've put in place, hope they see a vulnerability notice, and hope that they start taking action on it. And I'd really like to see a shorter time frame and a more consistent consistent way that vendors would be able to communicate with the end users and the security team, so I can see, do I have additional monitoring and things that I like to do. So I think that the notice, there's just too much that you have to parse through to try to find things. So I'd like to see, you know, shorter turnaround on fixing, but also a more transparent upfront way for us to know about them.
Yeah, I guess as part open source may make some of this more challenging because you don't necessarily have a vendor that you have a relationship with.
Yes.
And how do you even know what open source you've got is often an interesting challenge.
Yes, as Log4j can definitely attribute to.
yeah. I don't think anybody has yet fixed Log4j. They're just, you know, hopefully fixed it in most of the places that hurt. Yeah. So speaking of third parties, let's talk about third-party risk management. This is the hot topic, and those of you who can't see, Lorna just rolled her eyes at me. So for those of you who don't know what a third-party risk management, this is you have vendors and you need to make sure they're at least tall enough to do business with you. So how many checklists a year do you send to vendors, Lorna?
Every single vendor. I don't know, I've lost count. I hate it. I absolutely hate doing vendor reviews.
Yep.
I hate it.
Do they actually change anything?
No. Well, they do affect things, but really, and I've been trying to educate, you know, the folks in my team and some of the people we deal with, is that the vendor security review process really is a project review for security, not the vendor review. Because the vendors generally, anything I'm finding, they're, you know, I have to trust what they're saying. And whatever they're saying is a point in time. So you know, going through all of the delays of trying to get, you know, the latest assessments or the HECVAT or whatever it is, the SIG they're using, and trying to get any documentation about their program, you know, all I'm doing is, you know, you can write good stuff. If they write good stuff that convinces me that they seem to know what they're doing, I'm gonna have to say, go ahead. You know, so I really would like to see a whole different way of approaching third-party vendors.
Yeah, no, I would love to. So Yoav, I want to talk about Vendor Insights, which AWS just announced, which is basically centrally sourcing the checklist idea.
Yes.
Right. So what's that? How does that work?
So vendors that offer their services on the AWS marketplace can opt into automatic checks by AWS in order to verify things on their checklist. So that means that if a customer wants to purchase, let's say, a marketplace offering, they can see on the marketplace whether this vendor has the checklist implemented and correct. So it's to Lorna's statement that should alleviate a lot of the pain from checklists because they're A, verified automatically, and B, integrated into the buying platform. So you could hopefully in the near future say, I'm only okay with buying on the marketplace only things that are with this rating or higher.
I'm like, that's heaven.
Let somebody else do this for you.
Yeah, just think of the amount of time. If we think every institution, how much time they spend on doing vulnerability review, or excuse me, vendor reviews that we do on the exact same vendor.
Right.
And it's a point in time, whereas having it validated by a major player who's going to hold them accountable and hold them accountable on a regular basis.
Yes.
Okay, can I move to AWS sooner?
There we go.
Please.
Okay. Well, I guess you have to get all of your, you know, the people who don't want to talk to you to keep moving.
The rest of IT who wants to keep server administration.
Yeah. And then speaking of things AWS is doing, I think they also announced the V2 of security competencies.
Yes.
So how does that work? That's not the same thing as Vendor Insights, even though it sounded similar to me.
No. It's a way that AWS helps to, again, validate their partners.
Yep.
In this case, they have categories for each partner. We're, for example, on the vulnerability management category, and it again verifies and checks whether you stand your vulnerability management tool that fits into the AWS ecosystem. So it's one of those things that AWS again comes to help security practitioners to say, oh, this vendor not only has the vendor insights, so he is compliant by our automatic checks and he has all the right documents, but also we are verifying him as a tool that fits within our ecosystem into the following categories. So this is also something that they're doing for customers.
So is that the sort of thing that would at least help with starting the vendor selection?
Oh my gosh. You know, I learn a lot from working very closely with the various vendors, but when it comes down to really saying, is your tool really appropriate for the cloud environment? Is it really going to meet up and do the things that it says it does? And then when you have people that don't really know how to evaluate cloud tools, I think that's going great. That's exciting. That's truly exciting.
So both of these are about the CISO vendor relationship, and not to plug the other podcast that I'm a co-host on, which used to be called the CISO vendor relationship and is now the CISO series. I guess I just plugged it. Like, this is really about like, how do you build trust? So for you, Lorna, like, what are those points along the path in talking with a vendor where there's an opportunity to establish trust, either as a prospect or once you're working with someone? Like, what are the key pieces of advice you would give to a vendor?
So key pieces of advice include, are you really listening to your customer? If your customer says, I can only slice off this portion of what you supply, don't continue to try to sell me more than that. How can you understand and really take the extra effort? And you can build trust with me if you understand our environment and the limitations that we have. So again, you don't try to sell us something that we can't even use. And then another part is are you really able to have open conversations and tell us that, hey, well, you know, we're not going to oversell you on this, and we just want to help you start down the path and earn your trust that we will be open and honest with you. That is what is key to me for a vendor relationship.
Okay, good to hear. So any other vendors in the room? You shouldn't have showed up to my panel anyway, but there's your advice. So let's talk about scale and coverage, because cloud makes things bigger than they ever used to be. So you know, there's a lot of moving parts, and you know, yesterday Orca announced cloud detection and response, and it feels like this is like a thing lately. Everybody like lands in one platform and then starts saying, oh, we have this capability next door. Yeah. But I think that what's interesting is Orca, you know, tries to unify the data from all of its capabilities to come together. But what's the challenge like when you're trying to pull in data? Because I suspect your challenge of data integration is very similar to Lorna's challenges, just done at a different scale.
I think Lorna's problems are much more difficult because data integration is a problem that I can wrangle around, but having so many people in so many departments with so many conflicting requirements, that's really hard. But to your point, taking like event data and adding it to an inventory data, those things are very different in nature. And it requires a very good engineering and seeing how you build the right model so you can query things as events and as inventory together. That's a challenge. That's what we do day in, day out. So
what was the easiest and what was the hardest part of doing that integration to do detection and response?
The easiest was ingesting data, just bringing it over.
Okay. So great APIs.
What?
Great APIs exist to do
that. AWS have great APIs for fetching data, real-time data from events from the cloud provider. The hard part is actually processing it, generating insights, and analyzing it for abnormalities, and after that, making it available to customers in a way that it makes sense for them, and they're able to generate value from it, security value.
So Lorna, you know, I suspect for you, you know, very similar to what you all have said, like you have these interesting challenge of all the people, and how do you even get access to their data? And I suspect that most of the folks at Tufts aren't providing you an easy-to-use API to figure out what are their security problems.
No, it's a long journey of trying to get data, and so there's a couple different ways that I would look at data in this context. One is understanding the where all our data is going and who's doing what with it, and you know, it's very traditional. How do you get to the key? Always finding a choke point, something that's happening. And you know, one of the areas that is the biggest challenge for us is I love working with researchers. That's one of the reasons why I was happy to go into academia. But you know, they want to be independent and they want to do what they need to do. And so trying to find how we can support them and where all their data is going. And you know, 99% of our research is federally funded, so there's a lot higher level of security and bar that comes with that. So how do we understand and protect their data? And then on the flip side, how can we do security operations if we can't monitor what's happening? And so it's been a long journey, and finally getting, so the researchers we approach from the concept of, we want to help you be successful.
Yep.
And so how can we build more things and have more things already pre-vetted for you to make it easy as a checklist, so that once you start, you start running towards even getting that grant, you have an idea of what you can do. And so we're trying to get involved way before they go even apply for grants, apply for funding. From the IT perspective, is getting people to, they're starting to, a lot of the sysadmins and other IT people are starting to understand the value of having data easily accessible, so that we can detect and respond to the events that come in. And when, there's nothing like a good incident to bring people around,
To get the blood pumping.
to get the blood pumping, and to get those folks to see what it's like to actually try to figure out what happened. And when they get pulled in to actually help from their side of the data that they have on their systems and their applications, then it brings a lot more support down the road for, maybe we ought to have consistent logging, maybe we ought to have on centrally standard platforms, etc.
So I think I just heard Lorna ask you to point your researchers at her researchers to get their blood pumping.
I'll make the introduction.
Academia researchers, security researchers, I'm not sure they're much the same.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about new services, because AWS has announced, I don't even know how many new services in the last 48 hours, and I'm not going to ask either of you to tell me to guess what the number is, or even to name all of them. But new services are always coming out. New vendors show up. Like, Lorna, how do you prioritize when something new is on the marketplace to say, oh, that's something that I need to move to the top of my stack, versus, oh, that's something I'm going to wait and let it mature?
I move it to the top of the stack when it appears to be something that's been very well vetted, and and is a direct correlation to a problem that I have.
Okay.
And it's a low bar to implement. So if it doesn't require a ton of effort, and I know I'm going to get an immediate return, and I can trust that the vendor knows what they're doing and has a good product, a good history of producing products, then it'll be a lot easier for me to consider adopting it.
Okay. Do you have people on your team who are like going out and they're trying to adopt the newest stuff as soon as it comes out anyway?
Oh, our security, my team likes to have fun with as many tools as we can find, but we just don't have the appetite in the rest of the environment to adopt them. So, but periodically I'll get other people bringing. Now that we've extended and improved the culture and getting a lot of our IT people to be a part of the security posture, there's a lot more ideas that keep coming forward. Well, could we do this? And we'd really like to do that. And I'm the one now that's saying, we got to kind of slow down a little bit, because
Right, we don't want to become shadow IT ourselves.
Yes.
Okay. So you're on the other side of this, because you're building services on top of or next to AWS, or you're going to think about it. So when they launch new features, you have to decide which ones you're going to integrate with, and at what pacing.
Yeah, we have actually two hats here. One is that we're a customer, and we love to try AWS's new services and integrate them into our stack. But the other thing is we provide security for AWS customers. So when a new service arrives, we need to add it to our support for it into the product, and actually help new customers protect themselves using new features, which are not always well understood. But I have to say that our reasoning for adding new things to the stack are very similar to what Lorna said. If it solves a problem and we can implement it and it brings us great ROI, we will use it. And there are definitely new and cool services on the horizon. So,
is integration basically all or nothing, or are there sort of scales of like how much you would integrate and support?
No, definitely. Like everything in cloud is you scale by usage. So you start little by little, and it scales with you. So we definitely don't try to change all our production workload to using something new just immediately. The only notable exception for this is that when AWS released GP3, we just did that. Within 8 hours, we were all GP3. We loved it.
So that made for successful adoption.
Yes.
What was your worry at that point? Like when you sprint in,
No,
And
no,
like,
it was like
No worries?
they announced on stage better, cheaper discs. I said, let's do it right now. Like,
okay. So the most successful thing is it's cheaper. So it's back to ROI. If it's
Yes.
obviously has an ROI,
better,
you're going to
cheaper,
go right there. Okay,
no-brainer.
so this is going to be my last question. So this will be the opportunity for everybody else, because I really love to sort of ask this one. Automated remediation. Because every vendor that I talk to, like that's their holy grail is, we will just fix everything for you and you don't even need to have humans know we did it. Are you ever going to turn that on, Lorna?
Rarely. I really don't think so.
Okay, what do you need?
What do I need? I would need a way to test that automation in my real world environment with a subset of it,
Yep.
which already there is invalidating being able to roll it out. So I can test it, and will it really work in my environment? And then if it can, and testing it and proving it and being able to have the visibility into it. And then also what I would like to see as a part of the automated process is there is an automated testing, like user acceptance testing, that once the change goes in, there's some sort of pre-approved kind of things. We say, you're gonna test this, this, and this to make sure that you didn't break anything by doing the automation of the fix. And then an automated way to back out.
So it sounds like orchestrated change management, where a human might say yes or no at certain points, but everything underneath that is automated.
Oh, I love that. We're trying to go to a lot more automation, but you'd have to have a consistency of an environment, and we have to have tests, and that's one of the challenges has been, how do you test and feel comfortable that with your data sets and your tools that you've actually caught everything.
Yeah, context in those cases is paramount, because looking at a set of machines, you can say, oh, those machines are idle, let's terminate them off. And it's something, and then you discover that this is the disaster recovery machines, and you have now, you don't have a backup for disaster recovery. And it's context that it's really hard to put into a machine without understanding the full business context of the environment, which is very difficult for a machine from its point of view to reason. I'm not saying that putting more automation here and making things a lot faster and cheaper and making it better for the practitioners to do those things, those are amazing, and we've seen great progress. But having them closing the loop without any, in all cases, without any human is a bit frightening.
Yep.
But the AI is coming for us. So.
AI is coming for us. Yeah, coming for us, not tell, but just coming for us. Okay, great. So here's an opportunity. If anybody has a question in the audience, we have a mic that'll wander around, or Mariam will wander around. But if not, I get to keep all of the Orkies. Ah, look at that. That gets some questions over here on the right. But you have to hold the Orky until we decide if it's an actual good question, Mariam.
So with your vendor strategy, do you have a particular strategy and approach from moving, kind of shifting your weight toward partners rather than vendors, kind of as a multiplier acceleration strategy?
Yeah, I can start with that, certainly. I've always wanted to have vendors as partners. And we actually have a couple now that have been really good at being agnostic and helping us talk about the things that we really need, and then plugging in kind of then based on that, what are the type of solutions that are available to us. But yeah, if I can't partner with a vendor, then they're not going to understand our context.
So do you tend to work through like VARs or system integrators to sort of, so they can pick the right vendors for you for specific solutions versus just trying to hunt and find all the right vendors yourself?
Yes, yes. Yeah, a lot of times it's the resellers that are vendor agnostic that have really helped us.
I think I'm going to pivot the question. It's a great question. I think you get an Orky for that one, which is, so on the vendor side of this, like how do you work within the partner ecosystem? Or is that just a completely different part of the business you don't work with?
I actually don't work with them directly, but we try to be a great partner, which means building great relationship, helping partners understand how our platform meets into their ecosystem and how we can help them be more productive with their work, because resellers' time and customers' time is equally important in this relationship. So we try to help all of them.
Okay, great. Next question. Right down here in front, I saw a hand earlier.
I like it, adding partners in there. That's my jam.
Going back to the ROI comment and just how it is a difficult thing to measure, I'm curious your perspective on, maybe have you been successful at what I would call describing DOI, so debt of inaction, right? So I just made that up. So, but that the cost that gets deferred later and later, and in essence, does also rack up even additional interest. So if you have a manual process you're executing today, there's an opportunity to invest in automation.
Yep.
But the longer you keep that manual process going, the cost of changing it later, just because I'm just curious from executive level conversations, have you been successful at taking that angle to get investment? Has that fed into decisions on what to adopt and when?
So and I didn't quite, I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear all of it.
So it's around technical debt and the cost of inaction
is
as a way of thinking about ROI.
Yes, definitely. We have, especially in being higher ed, this is a conversation that we've been having heavily for the last, 4 or 5 years, which is the extreme technical debt is just becoming, the longer we wait, the more and more we're not going to be able to recover.
Yep.
And so some of the things that we're also talking about is, as we are getting rid of some of the technical debt, how are we making sure we don't fall back into that? So part of a decision of purchasing and implementation is, can we not customize it to the point that we can't change easily? And being aware of the things that got us into the technical debt in the first place: lack of resources, lack of training, lack of policies, lack of a cohesive approach, et cetera. And then having, keeping ongoing roadmaps and stuff, that we need to change that culture around how we manage that, so that we don't get into that technical debt, because it does become significantly harder. And you lose people,
right,
because they don't like working on this old stuff, and it becomes really painful to keep it up, and it's really painful to change. So if you really want to keep the best and the brightest and support your business in the best way, you need to not get so far into technical debt.
Yep. And so I agree, but on the same side, it is not a compelling argument in the executive suite. And the reason for that is that we in security think that debt is a bad word, and our CFO does not. Like, your companies borrow money. That's literally, the stock market is basically a way to borrow money in a structured way that you don't ever have to repay it, which is really awesome when you're building a company. You let somebody else repay it when they buy the stock later. So the problem is real, but I like to think of it as deferred risk. And at some point, you think about, you're traveling down in time as a business, and you're riding the rapids, and risk is just all of the rocks that are in your way. And when you start in a business line, like, the water's not moving very fast, and so rocks aren't that big of a problem because you have a chance to move them. And the longer you wait to get the rocks out of your way, and the more the water builds up behind you, the more deadly those become. And the more likely you are to suffer a bad event rather than just something that's annoying and a minor incident.
And I had that exact conversation actually earlier today. We were talking about some transformations that we're having, and with a senior level person, we were talking about, well, do we put the money into moving it, or what do we do? And then the part of it was looking at, well, we are starting to reach, we're not there yet, end of life. And we actually had the conversation that, you know what, it's okay to keep it going at beyond end of life, as long as we have other mitigations in place and we know where we're headed. It's not until you get years end of life and then you try to make an adjustment that then you have a harder conversation.
Yeah, my favorite argument with trying to end of life something was when people would say, oh, well, we're going to turn that off next year. And I said, well, where's the migration plan for everybody currently on it? Because it's a year after you show me the migration plan that I'd believe it, and people almost never had it at that point. Okay.
That's a good time to remind people that Windows XP is still living in the world and generating, and under the sea as well, because it's still running in submarines. So,
well, they're at least on Windows XP as an improvement. They used to be on 3.1. So, okay. Any other question? We have a question right here. Uh-oh, it's Marnie. This is going to be a challenging one.
She's going to make it hard.
You can just give her the Orca in advance, because I know Marnie will not ask me anything that a hard question.
No, I do not ask hard questions. So using Andy's analogy and talking about debt, most of the time we can't remove those rocks ourselves. We need help removing them, right? So getting you talked earlier about consolidating all of the information, all of the vulnerability information, and having that, which we love having as security professionals because we want to see that information. We want to know what our risk posture looks like. But most of the time we can't fix those things ourselves. So tell me about some of the best methods you've seen to persuade others to help you move those rocks before they become too dangerous.
I can say the number one best way to get people to persuade them is to make them to feel pain.
Yes. Yeah, in the early days at Akamai, when I was at Akamai, in the early days, our incident management process was as soon as we figure out whose component is broken, we call that manager in real time and make them run the incident. Let me tell you, engineering teams prioritized fixing their defects before they got into production because they didn't like 3 a.m. phone calls any more than I did.
So there's multiple different levels of pain, and that you could inflict on them. But it's things like, are you prepared to do? Right. Are you prepared to live without your service? Are you prepared? How much downtime can you handle?
Right. What's your incident budget?
Handle doing things on paper.
Yeah.
And really trying to put it into terms that are going to be meaningful for them. And actually, through that dialogue, you have the opportunity to actually reach agreement and understanding. So, my team can then scale down. I'm like, okay, we're not as scared, and we're okay. And so we're gonna say maybe we don't need to go to 5 nines, and then they can say, oh, well, yeah, you know what? Maybe I do need to actually think about disaster recovery. I need to think about making some improvements because, I can't afford to not have that tool or that thing. Networking.
And this one I got from my former chief of staff. She once said, look, there's just enough good work to do. And so her strategy was say, look, if we're gonna ask people to do one major project this year, let's go and show them 4. And say, we think that all of these are about the same importance from a security perspective, and we would like to only have 3 left at the end of the year. Which one would you like to do? Right? It does 2 things. One is you get a lot of information at that moment because they will tell you that like one of those was way harder than you thought it was, and it was probably the one that you most wanted to do. And so if you'd said, well, do this one, they're gonna spend their whole time telling you it's harder than you think it is, and then they don't do any work. But then once they have picked a project, it's no longer a project that security told them to do. It's a project that they prioritized. And just that mind shift, even if it took me 3 months longer to convince them and get them to that point, as soon as they picked the project, now they're invested in doing it. And that I found was one of the most effective ways, because the reality is, like, if you're using the rapids metaphor, and I should always worry that you run your metaphor too far, but like you don't try to eliminate every rock, and security's job isn't to eliminate every risk. So if you have 8 risks and you could get rid of 3 of them, if they're all about the same, you don't really care which 3. Like maybe these 3 would be like 5% better than those 3, but those 3 getting done is infinitely better than these 3 not getting done.
And there is one other flip side to this, which is we've been trying to be much more purposeful in our culture lately, is celebrating when we do get some of those rocks out of the way, noticing the benefits and how good it was.
Yes.
And keep bringing that up and up and up about, look at how good this was. Aren't we so glad we went through this? Yes, it was painful. It wasn't perfect, but we've made this much progress. We need to celebrate the progress we've made.
Cake. I literally, if you had a security project that was on my list that I'd shown to executives, you got it done. When we outbriefed the CEO that was done, you were invited to the meeting and we brought cake. And we celebrated that you were done, and you'd have engineers were showing up, having cake with the CEO. I will tell you, as somebody who sometimes had to go buy the cake, it was challenging dealing with everybody's dietary requirements, not just mine. But it was absolutely worth it, because we would sometimes have people then come to us and say, what do I have to do to get cake? And we were like, okay, you now understand success criteria.
Everybody loves cake.
Okay. Any other questions, or folks? Oh, look, we're out of time. We hit our 1 hour mark almost perfectly.
No.
So thank you everybody for attending. We really appreciate you showing up. Orca Security is at booth 502 downstairs. It is sort of hard to miss, but you might. So go looking for it. You can learn more about agentless cloud security with an easy-on integration. And I really want to thank both of you for coming out today and sharing your experience.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you all.